I don't believe in fate. Not in the poetic, romantic sense. Life, I've found, is more a series of choices laced with habit and regret than a dance of destiny. But even as I sit here recalling how it all started, I can't help but admit that something about that moment, the one that changed everything, felt orchestrated. Not by the universe, no. By me. Or maybe by some version of me I didn't know existed until that moment. It started on a Tuesday. Tuesdays are unremarkable. They don't hold the promise of a weekend or the fresh start of a Monday. They just exist. And that's exactly what I was doing that day, existing. I had just turned 52, and I felt like I was sleepwalking through my own life. Two grown kids, one still halfway dependent, a mortgage finally under control, and a marriage that had settled into something between polite companionship and shared inertia. Paul, my husband, was a good man. A reliable man. He knew how I took my tea, never forgot my birthday, and mowed the lawn like it was a sacred ritual. We didn't fight, but we didn't laugh much anymore either. We had drifted into that quiet room couples enter when the noise of raising kids fades and they're left to confront each other. Or not. Most days, we chose the latter. That Tuesday, I went to the university library. I'm a part-time research assistant for a professor who still thinks digitization is some kind of dental procedure, so my job is mostly finding physical records he could probably locate online. I don't mind. There's something comforting about dusty archives and yellowed papers that haven't been touched in years. They're like ghosts of better-formed thoughts. I was in the third-floor reading room when I first saw him. He wasn't supposed to be there. That much I could tell. Everyone on the third floor had a purpose, a system, a plan. But this man, tall, slightly unshaven, with a corduroy jacket that looked both expensive and thrifted, was wandering like he'd stumbled into the wrong era. He looked distracted. Not confused, not lost, just misaligned. Like someone who wasn't quite sure how he'd ended up wherever he was, but was pretending it didn't matter. I went back to my notes, but he stayed in my periphery, pacing slowly between the rows. I could feel him without looking. It was a strange awareness, like heat from a lamp you didn't know was on. Eventually, he stopped near my table. I didn't look up until he cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, voice rough with that 5 p.m. rasp that makes words sound private. "Do you happen to know where the university archives are?" I looked up and met his eyes, gray, intelligent, faintly amused. They were the kind of eyes that don't ask questions lightly. There was a stillness behind them that made me hesitate. "They're downstairs," I said. "Second floor, back left. But they're only open until 4. He glanced at his watch, real, analog, with a leather strap worn at the buckle. "It's already 4:20, he said with a half smile. "Well," I said, closing my notebook, "then you're out of luck." He tilted his head, considering me for a moment longer than politeness allowed. "That's unfortunate," he said. "I was hoping to find an old letter collection from the 1930s. Some correspondence about a railway project. It's for a paper." "Are you faculty?" I asked, curious. "Guest lecturer," he said. "Just here for the term. Architecture department." That explained the corduroy. And the slightly romantic disarray of his hair. "Too bad," I said. "Maybe tomorrow." He lingered a moment. Then, with a gentle nod. "Thanks for your help." And he was gone. I should have forgotten about him the second he walked away. But I didn't. That night, as I made dinner, chicken again, Paul was talking about our neighbor's new car, and all I could think about was that man's voice. His eyes. The way he said unfortunate, like it carried weight. And I remember this distinctly. I was wearing slippers with a small hole in the toe, standing at the stove, and I thought, God, when was the last time a man looked at me like he saw something interesting? 3 days later, he was back. This time, he was in the right section, poring over microfiche like someone born in the wrong century. I didn't plan on speaking to him. I didn't plan anything, really. But when he looked up and saw me, he smiled like we shared a secret. And maybe we did. "You again," he said. "Still chasing railway ghosts?" I asked, pretending to be casual. "Always," he replied. "It's a compulsion now." I sat across from him. I told myself it was just a coincidence that we were two people using the same space. that I was just being polite. But we both knew that wasn't true. His name was Edward. He was 48, divorced, and had a way of listening that made silence feel like foreplay. We started sharing coffee breaks, then lunches. We talked about design, about old buildings, and the way time leaves fingerprints. He liked jazz. He once played piano at a wedding in Italy. I told him about my husband, about our children, about the predictable rhythm of my life. He never commented. He didn't try to impress me. He simply asked questions and looked at me in a way that made me feel vivid, present, desired. The first time he touched me, it was nothing, just a hand on my elbow as I stood to leave. But I felt it for hours. I wanted to bottle the sensation, to smear it across my skin until it soaked in completely. We didn't kiss until the third week. It was raining. The university had closed early due to a burst pipe, and I'd stayed behind to finish scanning documents. He showed up, soaked through, hair clinging to his forehead, cheeks pink with cold. "I should go," I said. "You should," he agreed. But I didn't. He kissed me with surprising gentleness, like he was asking for permission even as he tasted the answer. I kissed him back with hunger I hadn't felt in years. And then I stopped, breathless, panicked by my own body's betrayal. "I'm married," I said, as if he didn't already know. He touched my face. "So am I," he said. "To no one." I left. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of guilt, but because of want. That was the beginning. We didn't rush. We circled. We danced. I invented errands, extended library visits, took long walks alone. Each time we met, it was like stepping into another life, a parallel one where I wasn't defined by the roles I played at home. With him, I wasn't a wife, a mother, a middle-aged woman trying to stay relevant. I was something else entirely. I was wanted. The first time we slept together was in a boutique hotel just outside of town, hidden behind ivy and anonymity. The bed was too soft, the sheets too clean, and my hands trembled like they had forgotten what to do with a man who looked at me like a poem. He undressed me slowly, reverently, as if I were some ancient text to be read with care. I remember the way his lips moved across my collarbone, the way he whispered things, not dirty, not romantic, but intimate. Observations. Praise. Descriptions of how my skin tasted, how I moved, how I made him feel. It wasn't just sex. It was discovery. It was rediscovery of myself. And afterward, lying in that white space between guilt and ecstasy, I didn't feel like a sinner. I felt awake. He said my name like it had weight. Not like Paul, who had reduced it to a routine, spoken through doorways and across dinner tables as part of logistical exchanges. Edward said it with intention, like each syllable deserved its own breath. I didn't know my own name could feel so intimate until I heard it whispered against my thigh in a half-lit room off campus, where the curtains didn't quite meet in the middle and the world outside faded to an irrelevant blur. I started dressing differently. Not in a dramatic way, just subtle changes. A fitted sweater instead of the usual cardigan. Lipstick a shade deeper than I'd worn in years. I caught myself checking my reflection more often, not out of vanity, but curiosity. Who was this woman with flushed cheeks and a new gleam in her eye? Where had she been hiding? At home, things remained unchanged. Or maybe I had just become better at playing my part. Paul didn't notice. Or he noticed and chose not to see. He was distracted by his woodworking project in the garage, his new blood pressure medication, the humming dullness of his evening TV shows. We still went to the grocery store together on Saturdays. Still discussed the week's meals, still watched the news at 6, side by side but miles apart. Sometimes, lying beside him in the dark, I'd imagine Edward's fingers tracing my spine. I'd bite the inside of my cheek to keep from sighing aloud. The most dangerous part wasn't the sex. It was how easily Edward slipped into the empty spaces of my life. He never asked for more than I could give, but he filled gaps I hadn't realized were gaping. Long conversations where I was the subject, the desire, not the obligation. Laughter that wasn't forced. Silence that wasn't cold. We were careful. We had to be. But in those quiet, stolen pockets of time, we created something private and entire. One afternoon, He brought me coffee, real coffee, not the burnt drip from the library machine, and sat across from me with a look that made my pulse skip. "I've been offered an extension," he said. I looked up. "Here." He nodded. "Another term. They want me to develop a seminar series." I should have smiled. I should have been thrilled. Instead, I panicked, because I had never let myself think further than the next rendezvous. I had kept the edges soft on purpose, like a daydream I could step out of whenever I needed. But this was real. This was a shift. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "That I want to say yes." And he hesitated. "That I want to keep seeing you." I looked at my hands. My wedding ring caught the light and glared at me. I felt a tide of shame creep up the back of my neck. "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted. "You're not doing anything wrong," he said, so gently it almost hurt. "You're remembering how to feel." I didn't respond. Instead, I looked at him like I was memorizing something important. The curve of his mouth, the warm brown curl that fell across his forehead when he leaned forward. I wanted to lock it all away just in case. We rented a cottage by the coast one weekend in early spring. I told Paul the first was attending a conference for university staff, something vague and uninteresting enough to dissuade follow-up questions. He nodded and asked if I'd be home in time to help clean out the attic on Sunday. I said I'd try. The cottage was small, weathered, with mismatched furniture and a view of the water that made everything else irrelevant. We didn't leave the house much. We didn't need to. It felt like an alternate reality, an indulgent bubble with no past or future. There, we were simply bodies and voices and breath. Edward made breakfast shirtless, kissed my shoulder while scrambling eggs. I sat on the counter, legs bare, watching him move like he belonged to me. We talked about nothing and everything, about books and music and the ache of time, about our marriages, his long over and politely buried, mine, still ticking like a quiet metronome in another city. That night, after a bottle of wine and hours spent tangled in each other, I cried. Not loudly, not even sadly, just silently as his fingers brushed through my hair. "I don't want to go back," I whispered, more to the ceiling than to him. "You don't have to, not all the way." I didn't answer. I couldn't, because I knew I would go back, because people like me always do. But something changed that weekend.
Something permanent.
After we returned, I felt a shift in everything. My home felt unfamiliar.
Too still.
Too beige. I moved through rooms like a ghost haunting my own life. Paul noticed, I think. He started asking questions, not direct ones, but probing. "Is something wrong? You've been quiet lately. Are you okay?" Each time, I smiled and reassured him. Because I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't want to blow up our carefully constructed life. I just wanted a door, a private one I could slip through when the weight of everything else became too much. But Edward had opened that door wider than I intended. One night, Paul touched me in bed. Gently, tentatively. It was the first time in months. Maybe longer. I let him, thinking maybe it would help me find my way back. That maybe, by allowing his hands on my skin, I could erase the phantom memory of someone else's. But it didn't work. I closed my eyes and thought of Edward, of the way he pressed his lips behind my knee, the way he whispered my name like it was a secret he was savoring. Paul's touch was kind, but it felt like routine, not reverence. Afterward, he kissed my shoulder. "You okay?" "Yes," I said. "Just tired." And I was. But not the kind of tired sleep could fix. Edward and I continued, though we both sensed something unsustainable had begun to brew. The weight of what we were doing became heavier, even in the lightness of our laughter. The secrecy, once thrilling, began to feel like a chain. But we couldn't stop. We were too deep, too hungry. Then something happened. Not dramatic, not scandalous. Just a text sent to the wrong person. I meant to message Edward. "Meet you at the place. Usual time. I need you." But I sent it to Paul. By the time I realized it was too late, he was already calling. The phone vibrated against the kitchen counter with a suddenness that made my stomach clench. I stared at the screen.
Paul.
I could feel the heat rush to my face, a sick wave of adrenaline that surged through my chest and settled behind my eyes. My fingers hovered over the phone, frozen. He called again. When I finally answered, my voice cracked under the weight of a smile I couldn't quite summon. Hey. A pause. Too long. Meet you at the place? Usual time? You need me?
His voice was quiet.
Not angry, worse. Measured. Controlled.
I didn't speak.
I couldn't. I assumed that wasn't meant for me. I opened my mouth, but no words came. I heard him exhale, the sound heavy and slow, like it took effort. Is there someone else, Ellen? That was the first time he'd said my name with such sharpness in years. No affection, no irritation, just cold inquiry. I closed my eyes, and for the briefest second, I considered lying. I almost reached for the excuse, the half-truth, the dodge. But something in me broke. Yes, I said, barely above a whisper. Another silence. He didn't hang up. I almost wished he had. How long? Months, I said. Is it serious? I paused. My hand was shaking. I don't know. He gave a short laugh, dry, brittle. Of course you do. I didn't try to defend myself. There was no point. Nothing I could say would unsend the message, unmake the bed I'd been lying in, or untangle the choices that had led to this exact moment. We both knew that. I'll stay at my brother's tonight, he said. You should think about what you want. He hung up before I could respond. I stood in the kitchen staring at the bowl of lemons on the counter. They looked too yellow, too bright, like props in a life I was no longer qualified to live. That night, I didn't call Edward. I didn't leave the house. I sat on the sofa wrapped in an old blanket, the one with the frayed edge and tea stains from winters past, and let the silence press in around me like a question I didn't know how to answer. The next morning, the house felt hollow. Paul's absence was physical, like a shifted gravity. His keys weren't on the hook. His slippers were gone. Even the dent in the pillow beside mine felt accusatory. I went to work as if nothing had happened. Sat at my desk. Answered emails. Avoided Edward's messages. Around noon, I slipped into the archive room and closed the door behind me. I sat on the floor between stacks of microfilm boxes and tried to breathe. My lungs felt unfamiliar, my body foreign. Guilt doesn't come all at once, it creeps. It lingers. It folds itself around your spine until even breathing feels like a betrayal. When I finally responded to Edward, it was with a simple, I need to think. Please give me space. He didn't reply. That night, Paul came home. He didn't slam the door.
He didn't speak.
He walked past me in the kitchen and went upstairs, the sound of his footsteps sharp against the wood. Later, he came down in sweatpants and poured himself a glass of water. He stood by the sink, back to me, glass in hand. When did you stop loving me? He asked quietly. My throat tightened. I didn't. He turned. His face wasn't angry. It was devastated. There's a difference. Anger demands something. Devastation only mourns what's already lost. Then why? I didn't know how to answer. Was it loneliness? Boredom? The terrifying realization that I'd become invisible in my own life. I wanted to say because I forgot who I was or because I was afraid I'd never feel alive again. Instead, I said the truest thing I could. Because I needed to be seen. He nodded. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, creased, tired, small. Do you want a divorce? The question hit like a slap, even though I'd expected it. I don't know, I said. And I meant it. He went back upstairs without another word. The next few days passed in limbo. We moved around each other like fragile furniture, careful not to bump or scratch or collapse. We didn't speak unless necessary. The air between us thickened with unsaid things. At night, I lay awake, replaying the choices that had led to this fracture, wondering if it had been inevitable. On the fourth day, Edward came to the library. He didn't text first. He just appeared in the reading room like a ghost summoned by longing. He sat across from me, said nothing, just looked. And I looked back because I could not. I rose slowly and walked to the far window where the light hit the marble floor in long golden strips. He followed, stopping a few feet behind me. "I got your message," he said. I nodded. "I didn't want to crowd you."
Thank you, I said.
He stepped closer. Not touching, just near. His presence was a weight, but not an unwelcome one. "I didn't mean for this to become a wrecking ball," he said quietly. "It's not your fault." He reached out, gently took my wrist, fingers warm. "Do you want this to end?" I turned, facing him fully for the first time since everything fell apart. "I don't know what I want," I admitted.
I'm unraveling.
He smiled faintly. "Unraveling's not always a bad thing. Sometimes it's how you start again." I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. And for a moment, I wanted to step into him, to disappear into the familiar heat of his embrace and forget everything that hurt. But I didn't. Not yet. "I need time," I said. He nodded. "I'll wait." I spent the next week confronting the life I had neglected. I talked to my daughter, who told me she'd suspected something was off. I visited my sister, who didn't ask questions but poured wine, and offered a hug that lasted just a little too long. I even sat across from Paul at the kitchen table and said the words neither of us wanted to hear. "I love you, but I don't think I'm in love with you anymore." He closed his eyes. Not angry, just resigned. "I think I've known that for a long time," he said. "I just didn't want to face it." We didn't sign papers. Not yet. We didn't talk about logistics or who would keep what. We just let it be. A wound left open to breathe. That Friday, I returned to the cottage by the coast. Alone. I needed to stand in that space again. Not as a lover, but as myself. To remember who I had been in that room, stripped of titles and roles and expectation. I walked the shore barefoot, let the wind sting my cheeks, let the tide wash over my feet until they went numb. And then I called Edward. "I'm ready," I said. "For what?" he asked, cautious. "To stop hiding."
From you.
"From myself." He didn't speak for a moment. Then, softly, "Where are you?" I told him. "I'll come," he said. And I believed him. The sound of his car pulling up didn't startle me. By then, I'd been standing barefoot on the wooden porch of the cottage for over an hour, wrapped in an old blanket, staring out at the gray horizon. The tide had pulled back, leaving behind wet ribbons of sand that reflected the dimming sky. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel, then silence. Then the door creaked open behind me. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. Edward's presence was immediate and calm, like warm light through a window. I felt him behind me before he said a word. Then, softly, as if he were afraid to break something between us, "Are you sure?" I nodded. "I'm not here to fix you," he said. "I'm here because I see you. That's all." That's all. And somehow it was everything. We spent that evening in silence mostly. Not the awkward kind. The safe kind. We made tea. Sat on the sofa, with our legs tangled together under the worn tartan blanket. He read for a while. I watched him, tracing the lines in his face with my eyes. The gentle weathering of someone who had lived a life, not just passed through it. Eventually, I leaned into him, pressed my face against his chest, and listened to the steadiness of his heart, the deep, measured rhythm that had somehow become the baseline to my own chaos. "Tell me something true," I said. He ran his fingers through my hair, slow and thoughtful. "I think I was already halfway in love with you before I knew your husband's name." I looked up. "That's not fair." He smiled. "It's not about fair. It's about truth." The next few days blurred in a way I want to remember forever.
No rush. No urgency.
Just time, uninterrupted, like a gift we didn't deserve but had been granted anyway. We made meals together, danced barefoot in the kitchen to Nina Simone, swam naked in the freezing ocean just because it felt like something we'd never dared. He made love to me the way someone memorizes a language they never want to forget. His hands were reverent, his mouth slow. There was no edge to it, no frantic hunger. Just heat and patience. I cried once, quietly, afterward. He held me, didn't ask why. But I knew. Because it was the first time I'd let someone touch me without apology. Because I wasn't borrowing time anymore. because I had stepped over a line that no longer felt like betrayal, but survival. When the week ended, we drove back to the city together. It wasn't dramatic. We didn't announce anything. We didn't move into the same space or change our Facebook statuses. We just resumed life, altered. The affair was no longer an affair. It had no secrets to hide behind. That made it scarier. More vulnerable. More real. Paul and I sat down that weekend and had the talk people always imagine they'll avoid.
The what now talk. We were quiet for a while.
Then he said, "Are you going to be with him?"
I didn't say yes.
I didn't say no. "I'm going to be with myself," I said. For the first time in a long time. And he happens to be someone who sees that version of me. Paul nodded. He looked thinner than usual. Paler. But not broken. "I want you to be happy, Ellen. Even if it's not with me." I broke then. Fully. Because I hadn't expected kindness. Not after what I'd done. I had prepared for resentment, for icy withdrawal, for cruel words spit through clenched teeth. But Paul was just human. Wounded. But human. We didn't fight over the house. He took the guest room while we began the slow dance of separation. He spoke to a lawyer first. I followed. We were civil. Kind even. And devastatingly sad. Because divorcing someone isn't just about ending a marriage. It's about mourning the life you imagined. My daughter, our daughter, was angry at first.
Distant.
She didn't ask questions, but I knew she wanted to. Weeks later, over lunch, she finally asked the one that mattered most. "Was it because of Dad? Or because of you?" I didn't lie. "Both," I said. "And neither." It was because something inside me died, slowly over time, and I didn't know how to stop it. He didn't kill it. I didn't either. It just happened. She looked at me, eyes softer than I deserved. "I just want you to be okay." "I will be," I said. Eventually. Things with Edward were never easy. We didn't ride off into the sunset or fuse into one perfect, healed unit. He had his own wounds, his own habits. His solitude, once comforting, sometimes made him distant. And I, still shedding years of compromise, sometimes snapped when I should have softened. But we talked, and we touched, and we saw each other again and again, every day that we chose to stay. I moved into a small apartment near the river. Light-filled, slightly cluttered, with creaky floors and old radiators that hissed in the winter. It was mine. All mine. For the first time in decades, I picked out furniture by myself. I hung art that didn't match the drapes. I burned candles just because. I made soup from scratch. I read books in the bath. I stopped checking the clock every evening like I owed my time to someone else. Edward didn't move in. That was never the point. He came over. He brought wine. Sometimes he stayed the night. Sometimes I asked for space. Sometimes he needed it too. We never defined it in rigid terms. But we kept choosing each other. One Sunday afternoon, he found an old photograph of me in a shoebox. One I hadn't seen in years. I was maybe 30. Laughing. Hair wet from a lake swim. A blur of sunlight on my bare shoulders. He held it up. "She's still in there," he said. I looked away. "She feels far away." He put the photo down. "Maybe. But she came out to play, didn't she?" I smiled. Quietly.
Yeah.
She did. It wasn't the ending I thought I'd have. It wasn't a grand love story, with violins and declarations. It was a soft, ongoing unfolding. A return to self. A reminder that middle age isn't a closing, but a doorway. That desire doesn't have an expiration date. That sometimes, to save yourself, you have to shatter something first. Even if it hurts. Even if it's ugly. I never stopped loving parts of Paul. I doubt I ever will. But I stopped needing to be small so someone else could stay comfortable. And that, I think, is what freedom tastes like. Even now, when I catch Edward watching me over coffee in the morning, I sometimes feel a pang of disbelief. That I let myself have this. That I crawled through the wreckage and found something not perfect, but honest. And I think, maybe this is what it means to begin again.